Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast, where you can awaken your mind to clarity and success even in today's life challenges. We're here to provide insights and solutions that will help you live a sane, healthy, and prosperous life. Here's your host, Joanne Victoria.
Hi, everybody. This is Joanne Victoria with another amazing episode of the Sanity Project podcast. You, the listener, are here to discover a life of clarity, confidence, and success. And I know that's going to happen with today's guest, Sarah Noll Wilson. Sarah Noll Wilson helps leaders close the gap between what they intend to do and the actual impact they make. Sarah creates a safe, honest environment, preparing people to deal with real-world conflict, have more meaningful conversations, and create purposeful relationships. Working with CEOs, HR leaders, and organizations that care deeply about their employees and understand the connection between employee development, employee satisfaction, and organizational success, Sarah specializes in transforming relationships from good to great. With 15 years in leadership development, Sarah earned a master's degree from Drake University in leadership development and a BA from the University of Northern Iowa in theater performance and theater education. We welcome Sarah Noll Wilson to the program. Hi there, Sarah.
Why, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am grateful that you are here and that I'm grateful we were connected and that you are here to talk about empathetic leadership. Because when you say here that you understand about their employees, that employees want to understand and care about the connection between their relationships. I've had a lot of complaints recently in just the opposite, that employers do not care about the employees. So how do you go about helping them create relationships, an honest and truthful relationship with their employees?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right that there definitely are organizations that are much more focused on the results, but there's also incredible organizations where they realize that the best path to the results is building really powerful relationships with their team members. And so, you know, it's meeting people where they're at and helping them see where do they want to get and showing them how, from a leadership perspective, you know, my focus is not just focused on the results. It's focused on how do I set up the people who are going to get those results for success? How do I get them what they need? How do I care about who they are and how they show up? And the companies who have figured that out tend to have higher engagement, tend to produce more than the companies that are just focused on the bottom line. And I will say right now, especially, one of the really significant gaps I'm seeing is that the companies that are committed to their team members in a way that is much more human focused. The team members are far more committed. They're far more engaged. They're giving the employer what they can with what they have left to give compared to those that are on the other end of the spectrum.
It does seem very challenging right now out there in the great big beyond world. So how did you get to this place where you are an expert on leadership?
Well, you know, I mean, I started on the stage, and so that's a longer conversation for another day. But, you know, ultimately, I found myself in a corporate job because I wanted to do theater at night. And what I realized, though, is there's this interesting dynamic at play and between those who are in positions of authority. So that's one thing I guess I'll clarify a little bit. When I talk about leaders, I think about that in sort of the formal traditional sense. But when I think about leadership, I don't think leadership is tied to a role. I think it's an act. I think it's something some of us do. But early on in my career, I was lovingly raised by a very traditional corporate structure where leaders, you know, were basically conditioned to be emotionally detached from their team members, to not care for fear that, you know, it'll complicate things if you'd have to fire them. So I spent about 8 years of my career in a situation of that sort of traditional business structure. And then I had the opportunity through my master's to get exposed to different types of leadership styles and was very fortunate to work for an organization for about 6 years before I started my own company, where there really was this commitment to how do we develop the whole person? There was this commitment to how do we see people not just for their role, but who they are, what they bring, and even more importantly, what can they bring that they can't even see that they can bring? And so how do we tap into that? And so having that opportunity to experience sort of the very traditional transactional type of work environment compared to the more transformational was a really big eye-opener for me of what would be possible if we truly honored human complexity and showed up in a way that was empathetic. And then that just led me to, when I saw the impact that could have, I wanted to do that work in a much more bigger scale. And so that's what led me to starting my own practice.
That makes a lot of sense. You were blessed, certainly, to work for an organization that was more interested in transformational coping with employees as opposed to the cut and dried of some of the very, 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 very large corporations the world holds. Yeah. I know that when I first started working at a tender young age, I worked for one of the biggest corporations in the world, and they cared nothing about their employees, and they still don't. And that's decades. And I just think that they hold on to that tight, I'm right, you're wrong kind of attitude.
Sure.
And I didn't survive that well. It didn't work for me. But also, I spent my years on the stage, too, in little theater throughout California and New York.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
What did you, okay, tell me more.
Well, I'll just a little bit. I was in small theater. Actually, that was my escape. When I escaped from New York, I was acting, and I'm trying to remember, I did all of the Shakespeare, the Neil, what's his name? Neil
Simon.
Neil Simon. Those are the SOPs for Little Theater and several other things. And I enjoyed them for a long, long time and was very successful, but realized that I was in a place where the timing wasn't right for me to do any more with it. So sure. I used it to go into business, and instead of selling myself on the stage, I was selling houses to people who wanted to buy them, and then transferred. People read my bio, they can see what I've done, but just transferred and transformed all of that, those skills into working with people today. Because no matter how authentic you say you are, there is still some skills required in holding yourself in a way that people see you in the way you want to be seen, as opposed to the raw nakedness of what you could be seen as. So,
sure. Well, it's, I think, I'm excited to talk with you about this because, this is such an anchor of who I am is, from a theater training perspective. Mm-hmm. My background was in how do you connect deeply with yourself so that you can connect deeply with the person who you're on stage with, right?
Correct.
And I think sometimes people think of acting as like, oh, you're faking it. Like, well, no, the good actors actually are really connected to it, and seeing that communion that could happen, that type of vulnerable connection, and communication and sense of community and, big picture systems thinking. I mean, there's so many things that I've learned from my theater days that is part of what pushed me along my path of, I remember my first, couple of days in the, out of college and just like, oh, do we all just talk about reality TV show and there's no emotional connection with each other? Like, okay, all right, I can do this. And, but then realizing that, people do crave that connection. They do crave that authenticity of being seen and being able to connect with other people. And so my theater definitely inspires my philosophy and the work that I do with teams.
Well, you have to find a place in your heart and in your soul that connects with the character you're portraying. Mm-hmm. It's not just saying lines. It could be some, today it's pretty bad out there right now. Most of the actors are just not very good because they're just, I'll look at something and I'll go, I can't watch this again. And my daughter goes, what's your problem? I says, well, first of all, it's not written well.
Yeah.
That's my first go-to. And second of all, they're just saying lines. There's not one sense of anything that I can relate to. I don't care for the characters.
Sure.
And I must care. And that teaches you now how to care is just by going to the soul of your client. And finding that, what?
No, keep going.
But finding that connection with who you're talking to. It's like we learn by listening, not by talking. So when you listen to your prospect before they become a client, even while listening to the client, you connect. There's that string, that thread that connects your hearts. That invisible thread, but I see it visible right now. But that thread that connects, and you go, that's the connection. That's the part of this person I'm speaking to. And you stay with that. Does that make sense? Or
it totally does. I mean, when you talked about just like, I mean, there will be some people who will listen to this and go, "Oh, I don't know about that," but I want to, and I want to talk to those people in a moment. But that idea of tapping into, you said like your soul, your heart to hold space for that other person. I mean, that is ultimately, it's a really beautiful visual of what it means to be an empathetic leader, and what we know is that authentic connection, that authentic caring, right? That coming from a place of, I know you have my back. All humans respond to that. So it's always interesting to me. I fundamentally believe and have seen that, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, we want to know we add value. And sometimes, like when we use language like, oh, heart and soul, people at work can get a little prickly about that, like, oh, you shouldn't have love in the workplace. And I would challenge that.
I do.
Yeah, good. Yeah,
I do.
These are people I work with and I spend more time with them than I do my other friends. And I think that, so knowing that you feel that way, I'm curious to get your thoughts. One of the things that I've been really interested in exploring is, what are some of the reasons we've removed emotions from the workplace? What are some of the reasons we have detached connection? And some of it comes down to this, well, I might have to fire them someday. Well, here's the thing. You can be candid and compassionate, right? You can, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is, supporting somebody and finding a new path or new journey. But that doesn't mean that I can't care for them before, during, and after it. And so I'd be curious to get your thoughts on why do you feel like we tend to detach emotionally at work, or at least seek that? Because real quickly, it's always interesting to me when I hear people will say, well, Sarah, we don't want it to be too emotional, and let's not talk too much about emotions. And we really like to leave emotions out of it. And it's like, listen, we are
That's
humans.
part of who we are.
We cannot remove it. Exactly. Like those emotions are in the room, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. And you ignoring them doesn't remove them. So why don't we try to understand them so we can navigate them?
People are terrified. People are terrified of getting too close to others, not because they may have to fire them, because that's a part of it, but not that big anymore. It's because they don't want to become engaged or involved with someone else at that level that's not family, real family, blood or loved ones. And I think that we have become such a cold society, such a detached. No, it's beyond detached. Detached is good from the Buddhist perspective, and I respect that because I practice that. But I'm talking about they've just become cold and frozen. People figure that's why there are so many extremes out there in the world today, because people's frozen has melted and anger is coming out. And people are afraid to get in touch with one emotion because then they would have to get in touch with all of them. Mm-hmm. And anger is included in that. But mostly they're afraid. They don't know what's going to happen. It's an unknown, and it's like an alien planet. Who are they really alien? Are there really alien planets? Are the people living there going to hurt us? So when we do that on Earth and trying to create more emotional connections with people, we are the alien planet because they don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's the unknown. It's fear of the unknown in a dramatic fashion.
Yeah. And some of what I definitely see is also, just like a not knowing of even how to build those relationships and how to step into that. It's one of the things that I'm very passionate about mental health and helping leaders in how they can show up more powerfully for people if they're struggling, or how to create an environment of safety, right, for people to be able to share, hey, I'm struggling, or here's what's going on. And there's an incredible I think you're spot on from the standpoint of there's this unknown, and then that unknown gets exacerbated because, well, now I don't know how to show up when that happens. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to be present with that. And, God, there's so many different paths we can take here. But, what's so fascinating to me and in the work that we do and the clients we work with is that on one hand, while people might say we need to leave emotions out of it, when you actually talk to them about what they want and what they need, they might not use language like cared for. They might not use language like empathy, mm-hmm. but they will use, language like, well, it's important for me that people can see my point of view. It's important that I can collaborate with people. That a lot of the descriptors, they might use different language, but that ultimately their need is, again, belonging, right? And connection and to be cared for.
Well, I think that people who are in leadership are compartmentalizing too much. People who are in corporate compartmentalize too much. So they put this little box, or big box, but they put this part of their life in this little box, and they have a little lock on that little box, and they say, nobody's going to get close to me because it's all in that little box. And I think when people, I would say especially men, because they don't have the capacity sometimes to create a boundary. So they might think that, sharing things about themselves means sharing about their personal life, and that's not necessarily true. They don't understand the difference between talking about themselves and what they would like to achieve, which is what you just said, as opposed to spewing everything out. So they need to be taken through it pace by pace, step by step, floor by floor, so to speak. If they're a 10-story building, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
You start at the beginning, which is the first floor. And if you've got 7 floors, et cetera, to go through, it's going to take a while to get there. And this is what you do. We don't talk about what you don't do. We just talk about what you do.
Yeah.
You talk about how you feel about being a leader, what's important to you, and those are the things that are important. It's not important to share about your wife, your spouse, your partner, your children, maybe your hobbies, but there's a boundary that has to be put in place, I think, so that people feel safe in even listening. Because,
Sure.
There's sometimes where you might get an audience that goes, ick, I didn't want to know that, whatever
Sure.
that might be. We don't know what that is because it's different with everyone. But if you have a safe place to talk to and about, I think it'd be more effective. So it's a process. I know it's another overused word, but it's a process. It's like anything. You learn to crawl before you can walk, before you can run.
Sure. I see what you're saying. Sorry, I was trying to track you in the sense that it's not necessarily like jumping to floor 10 where we are connecting in a much more vulnerable way, but where do we start? What are the initial stages of how we connect with each other? Did I hear you correctly?
Yes. We're creating the program right here.
Yeah.
7-step program. And, it'll take whatever time it takes. I mean, you have a 12-month program and that's fine. But if you're dealing with a group, a small group, not a mastermind group or whatever it is, a small group of leaders who feel comfortable being together, it's no different than an AA program, sort of, kind of. It's like first you're invulnerable, then you become vulnerable by fractions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the goal is progress. There's not like a destination.
Yes,
Every relationship will be different. Every situation. I wanna take a moment and highlight something you said earlier, and just to like expand on it a little bit when you talk about men, because obviously in this work we work a lot with executives, which typically are mid-career men. And part of that is, right, just like there's a bias against women from assertiveness, right, that culturally there's this expectation or conditioning, right, that boys don't cry. And right. And so so I just want to acknowledge the fact that it's not necessarily that men are flawed. And that's not what you were saying at all, but to just validate, because I hear this a lot from my clients, my male clients, is like, I've been conditioned, to not be in touch with my emotions, because that's not what a man does. And that's not what a leader does. And that compartmentalization you're talking about. And what's so interesting is that, even though that's been, kind of culturally conditioned, that there's still this craving. Because again, when you remove titles, when you remove, our facades, if you will, ultimately what we're left with are human beings who desire connection, safety, belonging, a sense of fulfillment, right? Being grounded in values and meaningfulness. And I love your point of, that it's not jumping to, hey, let's cry together. Sure. And also, let's be real, that's not necessarily, that may or may not be vulnerable for some people.
Right.
But just, that idea of, so from my perspective, it's, just starting with, how do we just start to get curious with ourselves? And what's the impact we want to make? And how do I want people to feel when they connect with me? And where does that come from? And really starting with yourself, before you can then, step in and move up to that, floor 2, floor 3, where you can start to get curious about the other person and build that relationship.
Well, I think, I'm only talking about men and women and not any other delineation of the titles.
Sure.
So I'm saying that men need to know what it is to be a man, and women need to know what it is to be a woman. There's a reason that there are 2 species in this conversation, because men and women complement each other. They're not the same. And if women have to learn a little more how to, get their tail, put it away, and step out, that doesn't mean they're trying to be a man. If men think they need to cry, that's not about them being a woman. That's not how it works. Men need to own who they are first. Women need to own who they are first and not try to pretend or take on other personas in order to validate what they're trying to do in the world. They need to know who they are as a species, because they contribute from that perspective, and their talent and their soul, all of it. They have to come as a human being. And that requires a lot of attention, a lot of deep work, and some are going to become faster than others with men and women. But men do not know where the boundaries are, because it's never been made that clear to them.
I'd like to respectfully disagree with that. I understand you're speaking in generalizations.
Absolutely,
but
general.
right? So, on an individual basis, that obvious, it's different depending on who they are. But certainly, again, looking at society and cultural conditioning, right? Some of those boundaries are put in place that aren't necessarily rules, and so I'm always really, I just want to be thoughtful of honoring. Honoring the fact that there are generalizations for a reason. However, individuals show up in unique ways depending on their experience. That it's not all or none, but certainly there are factors at play that make it more difficult, right?
Yeah, when I say men don't know how to be men and women don't know how to be women, or they need to know how to do that first, I'm talking about men and women who have an issue with that, who cannot get in touch with who they are. So they need to know, what is it about being a man that I'm missing? What is it about being a woman that I'm missing? What do I need to know more about myself? How deep do I need to go, if at all? I mean, some people, get 10 people in a room, it's like getting 10 lawyers in a room. You're going to get 10 different variations on a response to a problem. And that's the same with people. They're going to have different perspectives based on if they have gone past their Peter principle or not.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, right, like that. Yeah. It just comes down to the individual of knowing, what do I need as a person? Who am I? Who do I want to be? What's important to me?
And why?
And that anchoring into, and I think that is, I can speak from my experience personally, and also, in people, my circle and the work we do, is that we're not always given the space or the tools to do that kind of exploration. One of the, I always make this kind of, joke, but it's, I got more training growing up into how to drive a car than I did in understanding me and understanding the other person and understanding how do we navigate this together. And I think that, although I would hope and love that is just a natural thing that happens. I mean, I can speak for myself that it took some challenges in my life for me to really reflect and give myself permission to and space to go, who am I? And what are the rules I'm holding on to? Maybe because of like gender expectations, because of geographic expectations, because of how I was raised, or whatever the case might be. And it took me a while. I'm still, right, it's a work in progress. I don't think you're ever just self-aware. You're always evolving. And to shed some of those like rules or facades that I was carrying that I didn't even realize were there until I took the time to really get clear about who am I and who do I want to be and how do I want to show up in this world, even if that means it might be in conflict of what people expect of someone who looks like me.
Okay, people, I think they got it. And I hope we've covered the aspect of empathetic leadership, but it is about knowing who you are first and then transferring that to other people, because you and your company. And how can people find you, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. They can connect with me on social media, but our website is www.sarahnollwilson.com, and that's SARAH, Sarah with an H, because as Sarahs were always asked that,
Right.
NOLLWILSON.com, and on social media as well.
Well, I think this has been an interesting conversation that could probably go on for another hour.
Indeed.
But we have guidelines here, and that's just the way it goes for now. But Sarah will be back in a few months to talk about her new book, which is called Don't Feed the Elephant: Overcoming the Art of Avoidance to Build Powerful Partnerships. There we go. Don't feed the elephant. And she'll come back when it's published to talk about it a little bit more. And I want to thank you, Sarah Noll Wilson, for being here today. As I said, we could talk for a long, long time.
Oh, for sure.
And we'll figure that out some other way. And I wish you the best, because you have
likewise.
A great foundation here. And I think that what the message that you have for your people and for the universe is a very good one. And I'm sure all the Buddhists that are listening are very happy. Or anybody who has studied Buddhism, because you are right on point with compassion and empathy. I thank you very much for being here today. And for you listeners, you might want to go to my website at askjoannevictoria.com and get your copy of the True Self Handbook, a guide to transform your life. And that's free, as they say in the world. Take care, everybody, and talk soon.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sanity Project podcast. Please go to askjoannevictoria.com to listen to more podcasts. Check out Joanne's coaching programs and get a free copy of her report, 5 Steps to Achieve Life-Work Harmony. That's askjoannevictoria.com. Take care, and thanks for being here.